Hey everyone, my name is Nathan Bird, founder of acquisitionconference.com and aquacon.live. We've got a big conference coming up here in Salt Lake City on March 21st. And I'm seated here with Bryce Morgan. He's an M&A lawyer. He's been doing it for over 10 years, hundreds and hundreds of transactions. And I'm excited to learn a little bit more about why you love what you do and also some of the crazy deals that you've gone through to where we can educate those out there that are listening that may be in a position of one, wanting to buy a company, two, wanting to sell a company, and also do it the right way by using some legal structures that you would help to suggest. So share with me why you love what you do.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. So I'm Bryce Morgan. I'm a partner at Snell & Wilmer, and I specialize in mergers and acquisitions. That's the bread and butter of my practice. And the thing that I like most about being an M&A attorney is, number one, I get to be involved in really interesting deals with cool people who are doing, interesting things. They have great ideas, and they're taking kind of their capital and their ideas and their grit and combining it all to, make things happen and to grow businesses and to acquire them. So it's a lot of fun to work with those types of people and to be involved in interesting stuff. And then it's just fun to get to do deals. I mean, it's really, it fits my personality type. When I was going to law school, I knew right away I did not want to be a litigator. I did not want to fight over, scraps at the table. I wanted to be involved in something more collaborative and exciting where people are working together to a common goal.
There's a lot of psychology in what you do as well, as you are helping one side, deal with the other. What side do you typically focus on?
I would say that I'm more often on the buy side than the sell side. I do both often, but as you can imagine, with any business, repeat clients is a great thing. And so I've been fortunate enough to develop some good relationships with buyers who are doing roll-up strategies across a few different markets. And, I'd say that for the most part, I end up on the buy side more, but I'm always happy to do the sell side. And frankly, I'd say that the sell side can be more fun just because you're working with a client who's spent years of, time and effort building this business, and now you're there at the liquidity event, and they're getting to really cash in on all that hard work, and that's a lot of fun.
This is good. We're going to get right into it. We're going to go identifying a good target and then what it is you have to do in order to successfully purchase that target. How do you do it from a law standpoint? And what would you suggest people go through the process?
Yeah, so if you're on the buy side and you're looking to buy a company, I think that looping in experts in law, finance, accounting on the front end is very important. You need to basically do your initial due diligence on these targets that you're looking at. And from our side as lawyers, we're looking at a lot of the legal risk. So we're looking to make sure that, number one, the people who own the company actually own it, right? Because or maybe you wouldn't be surprised, but it's amazing to me how many times there are handshake deals where it's like, oh yeah, Uncle John owns 5% of this company. It's like, is that documented anywhere? No, or we wanted to grant equity to our employees and we want them to cash in on the deal. It's like, well, did you paper that up and put that together? Oftentimes It's not, exactly. So we call in mergers and acquisitions, we have a purchase agreement, and we call it fundamental representation. So it's the foundational promises that the seller is making to the buyer, saying, hey, I own the stock of this company. We've complied with the law. We own the assets, and they're sufficient to run the business. These kind of main promises that buyers care about and want to make sure they're getting, we're focused on that to make sure that these companies are who they say they are, they have what they say they have. And so that's probably, how we initially dig into these companies and what we're looking for at first as lawyers.
Step one. So what's step two? As we start to go through, so maybe you can break it up into 5 different steps. Maybe you have more, I don't know. But,
Sure.
Maybe you can visualize the pillars that are most important through a successful acquisition.
Absolutely. So I'd say first, when you're a buyer, you're going to be looking for your target companies. And so you're casting a very wide net. This is usually before I get involved because there's no point in bringing in lawyers until you've kind of got one on the hook, if you will. And so what will often happen is, you'll go out, you'll find your target company, you start kind of talking and determining, hey, we can do this deal. At that point, you'd usually loop in legal to help you draft your LOI, your letter of intent or your term sheet. And so the idea is, you would put together kind of your offer. It's not generally binding other than exclusivity for a certain period of time to allow yourself to do due diligence because as a buyer, you don't want to invest money and then have them turn around and sell the next week to somebody else, right? You want to lock them up for a period of time. And then, so you get the LOI signed. Then the next step would be to launch in, do full-blown diligence where you're really digging in. You've signed an NDA with the seller.
They can't solicit.
They
a
can't
non-solicitation.
Correct. Yeah. So you do both the non-solicit in the LOI stage, and also have confidentiality in it, so that you as the buyer aren't going to go out and share it with other people or whatever. And as the buyer, you really wouldn't want to anyway, because you want to buy this company, hopefully, you know. So anyhow, so after that kind of stage, you launch into full-blown due diligence and negotiation of the deal documents. And that's where I mostly play. So my associate team is doing the diligence, and I'm negotiating the actual purchase agreement, whether that's an asset or a stock purchase agreement, and the other ancillary documents, if you will. So oftentimes you'll want the seller to stick around for a number of years to help transition the business, or there are other services or other types of agreements that we need to work out to make the deal work. So that's kind of
share with me some tactical advice and ways that you can negotiate the best deal.
Good question.
There's also psychology involved in that as well.
There is.
And some people are more aggressive, others aren't as aggressive.
Yes.
More empathetic. There's a lot of ways that you can negotiate. What ways have you seen that are more successful than not, where both parties are happy?
Yeah, great question. I would say that the clients that I've seen that have the most success doing roll-ups, they usually have a team with a few different personality types, and there's always one guy or gal that is really good with people, that can build that relationship of trust, because this is a long process. It usually takes at least a few months to do a deal if you do it well. I mean, we've done much quicker ones, but I'd say that on average it takes a few months. And it's a lot of back and forth. The parties get annoyed with each other at times. Often it gets pretty intense when there's a fundamental disagreement on value or on some type of risk. And so having the ability to establish a relationship of trust and, respect and even friendship, with the other side is important. And I see that as a really successful technique of just building and establishing trust, which helps you proceed forward. And then you got to know when to, draw a hard line and say, look, these are liabilities that we can live with and risks we can take, and these are ones that we cannot. And I think that...
So setting boundaries up front immediately during the transaction?
Exactly. Or, if it comes down to it, I've seen people be very accommodating, to try and get things done, but there are just certain things that are deal breakers, and it's good to just lay that out when they're found and just say, look, we can't proceed without addressing this somehow. We have to allocate this risk accordingly. So... yeah, you see all manner of different types of style, people who are really aggressive, people who are accommodating. They all, have their pros and cons, but I'd say that the number one thing that seems to get deals done is, making sure that everyone's aligned on goals at the beginning, what people are trying to do, and then kind of people who stand behind their word and establish that relationship of trust. They get deals done, and they get repeat deals because they are people of their word and make it happen.
We're on stage 2, just like you said, and we now have got the LOI. We're doing our full-blown due diligence throughout this process. We just found out that it's a pretty good purchase. So walk us through, what do we do now as we are looking to actually purchase that bad boy or that company, and then also how do we get access to the funds that we are wanting? Is it through the already existing cash flow of the business, or is it through an SBA, or is it private? What would you suggest?
Boy, yeah, that's a great question, and it's really up to the buyer and what they're able to put together. So I'd say that going into any deal, if you can understand your own financial capabilities at the outset, that helps you be a lot more competitive when you're putting out offers to sellers. You can say, hey, we've got cash on hand to do this deal, or we have access to a credit facility, or whatever it is that the buyer has. I see more and more often, seller finance is a big component of transactions, and it's increasing even more over the past couple of years, where, a few years ago, buyers had to really put their money where their mouth was and pay cash up front. Now, with the market having shifted some, now, sellers are being asked to finance a portion of the transaction, so it'd be deferred. So let's say that you're doing a $10 million deal, we're going to pay you $6 million up front. And the $4 million, maybe $2 million of it is payable over time, and it's not contingent on anything other than just time. And then some of it's what we call an earn-out, where the company post-closing has to meet certain metrics in order to earn the remaining couple $1 million that was kind of in the initial offer. So that type of creative financing can be really a useful way to bridge the valuation gap. So it's like, hey, the buyer doesn't have the cash up front or can't get the financing, but the seller thinks their company's worth more. Here's a nice way that we can bridge that gap and say, hey, cool, we'll pay you what we can now, and we'll contractually agree that we can pay you more if certain metrics are met. And, incentives are aligned, and it makes a lot of sense. So, when you're on the sell side, of course, there are risks to that, but if you believe in your company, and I think that it also encourages the sellers to stick around to help make sure it, goes well. So it's when I'm on the buy side, I often will say, hey, even if we have cash, can we make certain pieces of this contingent just to help make sure that this was a good deal for the buyer and incentives are aligned for continued growth.
Extremely important. So we've got a scenario that we're going to create here. It's an extremely difficult transaction. What creates an extremely difficult transaction?
Yeah, good question. So on deals where it's been really tough sledding, I would say that either, a big one is when people retrade important deal points up front. So at that LOI stage, hopefully you're setting forth what the plan is for. Here's the purchase price. Here are the terms. Here are the main things that are important and deliverables that have to be met, et cetera. When, and unfortunately, it's just the reality that sometimes due diligence or quality of earnings will uncover that this isn't what we thought. We've got major issues, and we need to change the terms of the deal. That can, of course, be a very difficult thing because nobody wants to be paid less or pay more for a business. And so that can be tough. Tough personalities can always be challenging. And then, hairy deals where a company maybe has a rocky history, not very good corporate governance, not very good, record keeping. It introduces so much more and more risk for the buyer, that they might be taking on, and for sellers as well. And so when you have just a whole combination of those type of factors, it can get pretty messy. Yeah,
when I've gone through due diligence and the acquisition of a company, and a few for that matter, it's just a matter of, the sellers, they have this perception on the value of their company, and then the buyer has a perception on the value, and it's this almost this back and forth. Have you found a good way or a good medium in the middle to be able to kind of cushion that the exchange between two parties of like one thinking one thing and the other's thinking a completely different thing?
Yeah, good question. It's I'd say that controlling the communication and being intentional about how you address an issue like that is important. So let's say that we're on the buy side and we're digging into this target company, and it turns out that we determine there's some toxic liability out there that exists. There's some issue that we're really concerned about as the buyer. I think that, being straightforward with the other side but being thoughtful, so we wouldn't just immediately call them up and say, this is an issue, and freak out and not really have a plan. So, every time I work with my clients, the kind of overall mantra I always have is, what are we trying to accomplish, right? Like, what is the goal here? And so when we're trying to, once we know what we want to do and we have this, so we find this issue, let's determine how we'd like to solve it, what would make sense, consider how the other side is going to feel about this, or, think about how it impacts them, and try and come up with an idea already. That way, when we find this issue, we present it with, here's what we found, here's how we think we can, solve it, and try at least to, find some type of mutually beneficial or, at least a way that doesn't just hammer them over the head so hard. So.
More solution-oriented, and as we know, the people that have the solutions to the problems as opposed to people that just complain about the problems initially win. And they're, in essence, create more value for the world around us. Interesting. You've been in the industry for over 10 years. What are some other things that you've seen, during transactions? What's a post-transaction look like?
See, that's something that's really interesting that I've thought about recently in my career more and more. So as deal lawyers, we're involved in the deal, but we're not often very involved with post-closing, integration of the business transition. So, and when you as a, entrepreneur, if you're looking to buy a company, there's just a lot of things that you might not think about that are important. So you've got, employees that you're now potentially going to be shifting them onto new healthcare benefits, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to be changing the payroll processes potentially. You are going to be integrating them into a new culture, new org charts, new reporting structures. It's really, there's a lot that goes on there. There's probably going to be fat that might be trimmed. There's just a lot that goes into it. And we as the deal lawyers, it's important for us to think that through and make sure that we have plans for post-closing and that we inform our clients on how to do it. Because I think that can be a pitfall where it's like, we did this deal, well, now we have this company. Now what are we going to do, right? And you have to make sure that you've got a game plan for day one. And I mean, there's so much that goes into that. When do you communicate to the employees? Because as a buyer, you might not want to buy a business until you've really talked to the employees and made sure that you know who's going to stick around, who's valuable, what you need to do to make sure that this goes well. But at the same time, no seller wants to have their employees know that the company might be up for sale and your job might be at risk or whatever might be the case. So these are interesting things that a buyer really should, think through, and a seller for that matter. Like, if I'm going to sell my company, what's going to happen to my employees? How are we going to, what's going to happen to benefits, retirement plans, whatever it might be that's, important to you as a business owner, is something to consider as well for post-closing.
Man, that's way bigger than just looking at the cost and looking at the strategy of integration into your already existing organization to increase valuation. I mean, there's so many other avenues that people must look at. What are some good team members, though, to bring in post-merger? Yeah. Other than the lawyer.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I mean, bringing your legal is important. It's important to have financial advisors as well. A lot of my clients will have that in-house, but you definitely need to have a numbers gal or guy that can make sure these things work. And then, I think that having someone who's dedicated to integration post-closing is important. If, oftentimes buyers will have a head of corporate development or some other type of role that quasi does that. But I've seen that some of my bigger clients, they do really well when they have someone who's just dedicated to post-closing integration, post-closing change management, action items. What do we do to make sure that this goes smoothly and we have as few disruptions as possible to the business? So that's always, of course, resources are tight. And so that's something that's obviously at bigger companies. But even if, you're a smaller shop, if you can just dedicate, make sure that it's like, look, this is an important thing. I'm going to dedicate some time and resources to these processes and making sure that we fold this business in nicely and, kind of hold people's hand. Because you mentioned the psychology. It's amazing how much, we as deal people often don't think about how this is affecting the ordinary people who are doing the operations of this business. There's going to be a lot of concern with who are our new buyers, who's going to be owning this company, what's going to happen to me after this, how is this going to change the culture of the business, et cetera. So it's important to think about that and to have a game plan for messaging with your employees, messaging with customers. How, if you've got a great brand that you're acquiring, how do you keep people loyal to that? If you're going to be bringing in your new brand, how do you go about trying to keep existing value, but also, building on and getting
just incentivizing them to also be a part of the new vision. That's what I realized too. You've got two different companies coming together. One has an entirely different viewpoint of what they do and how they do things, but then you have another company that then formalizes a new company. Like, it's a new vision. It's everything is new. It's a new business plan, right? For the most part. And whether it's an entirely new drafted business plan or just minute changes that are within that document, or at least the vision, I think it's an interesting dynamic.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the lasting pieces of education that you would provide somebody who is wanting to buy a company, and how would they go about that process? I know we've covered a lot of it in this, but any lasting pieces of education for those out there?
Yeah, I would say that if you're looking to get involved in buying a business, starting with something that or that if you can bring in partners that know this industry really well, that's key. If I don't know anything about running an HVAC company, it's going to be a tough deal to try and go out and do a roll up of all these HVAC companies in a certain geographic location. So my successful clients who are entrepreneurial and business savvy and have done really well with an M&A kind of acquisition strategy, they've generally either have the industry specific knowledge that they need in the space they're going to be operating, or they bring in partners who are, and making sure that those partners are incentivized where they have ownership in the enterprise, especially if it's subject to vesting, to make sure that they're incentivized to stick around and make it grow. I think those can be really useful approaches. So I'd make sure that I know and understand the industry that I'm trying to operate in, that I look into my financing options and make sure that I kind of have a plan for, how I'm going to, get the funding to do these deals. And then making sure that you bring in experts that know doing deals and can help you do it. Because, the whole penny wise, pound foolish thing, my grandpa was a really successful business person, but he didn't like paying lawyers and didn't like paying accountants. And, once he passed away, we realized that things were not well set up and not well documented. And it was like, darn, we really left a lot on the table here where, yeah, lawyers are expensive, accountants are expensive, but boy, they're sure worth it, So that would be the other thing, is make sure that you have a really good, solid team that can give you good advice, because they're worth it for sure in the long run. It's a big net benefit.
This podcast has been just a wealth of advice, and we're so appreciative of you coming on here. So we also will have you at the acquisition conference coming up here in March in Salt Lake City. What can we expect to hear from you on the panel? I know you're going to be on the buy side, and what can we expect from
Yes, I'm very
Mr.
excited.
Bryce?
I'm excited to be part of it. I'm looking forward to being here in Salt Lake City for that. Mm-hmm. And I think that the goal is we're going to be talking about, when you're buying a business, the different pitfalls that might be in front of you as a buyer of businesses. Talking about putting your deal teams together, talking about diligence, just the general approaches that we'd want to take. And then I'm looking forward to hearing questions from the audience and being able to, give my advice. I'm not on the clock, so it's a nice time to be able to pick my brain. And
the interactive Q&As seem to create a flow within the audience. That's why we love doing these events and these conferences, that really aggregate some of the brightest minds, as well as service providers just like yourself, who've done over, hundreds and hundreds of transactions. And there's an extreme amount of value when you bring everyone together at one time to go through that. And also the energy. The energy is what's going to be brought. So, again, thank you guys for taking a look at the Acquisition IQ podcast. We're here with Bryce Morgan, M&A lawyer. And if you guys want to come and hang out with us at aquacon.live, make sure just to grab your ticket at aquacon.live, and we'll see you in the room.